In this video I will be taking you through the different principles of games design. This means we'll be looking at different games and analysing the world, characters, feedback interface, perspectives and full motion video within them. By the end of the video you will be able to understand why game designers put particular things into the game, or why they make a game a particular way, and what that means for the player and how it affects the player's experience. The world and terrain is the space that the player moves in and interacts with. Examples of types of terrain are mountains and deserts, and also urban areas. The world in The Last of Us is made up of destruction, but also beauty. While the buildings, cars and all mechanical objects are destroyed and rotting, nature is taking over by climbing up all the buildings and just overrunning the urban environments. I believe they have done this to show how powerful nature is, as the disease was caused by nature and then evolved to affect humans, and how weak we are against it. It shows us that we overlook what nature can make us become, and this is shown by the sheer destruction. It's obvious that the target audience is of an older age, but the world doesn't show that, as it's bright and colourful but misleading. This is why the world is so powerful to the player. The world in GTA 5 is extremely detailed. This is to make the player believe that they are actually in a real city, as almost everything you can think of as being part of a city is in the GTA 5 landscape, from piers to the army base. It covers a wide range of different landscapes, from urban environments to desert and water environments. Due to the city features, prostitutes, murderers, etc., the game clearly isn't appropriate for younger people, but different parts of the city have a different colour scheme. For example, the main city is bright and colourful, as rich people live there, but in the desert where poorer people live, it's not as bright, seeing as the atmosphere within the game is very different. I believe they have done this to show off, as the visuals of the game are very good. Titanfall is an Xbox One exclusive. The maps in the game are very futuristic, which shows the genre of the game. The maps are rather generic, with abandoned buildings, leaking pipes, pools of stagnant water, and random bits of shrubbery that's dotted about the map, which I feel is unnecessary, as it looked like the map was dying. However, it may signify that not everything is dead to the war, and still the smallest thing lives. The colour scheme was very grey and lifeless, which shows us that the war has taken over a lot, and even the colour of the environment has died. The atmosphere is very glum due to the world, which means that you don't have a cheerful experience playing the game. The player just gets the feeling that the world has been destroyed, and that's it. It's just too basic, revolving around one thing. Due to the destruction, I believe that the game is only suitable for older ages. I don't see a reason for it just to be an exclusive to Xbox because of this. The crew map covers the entirety of America, obviously scaled down, so the map, while being in an awful lot of detail, covers a wide range of terrains. It is not at all basic. Cities are extremely detailed. I believe they have done this because the player cannot get out of the car, so they can't explore any of the buildings. This means they only need to concentrate on the shell of the environment, which means they'll have more time to work on it. As you customize the cars become more suitable for the terrain. For example, a car with better suspension will be able to drive on the desert terrain, as the terrain is so realistic that rocks and rubble in the ground will affect how the cars will drive. As the game is brand new, it actually hasn't even been released yet. This means that the company can make the map on a much larger scale due to the advances in technology. This means that the player can interact with the world a lot more, and isn't limited to a small space. This is especially good for multiplayer. As Bowser's Inside Story is a relatively older game, it was released in 2009, and it was only released on Nintendo DS, the terrain is very limited. This side-scrolling game is set in many different locations. For the main part of it, the game is set inside Bowser, and in the forest and beaches leading up to Bowser's castle. The forest and beaches that Bowser travels through to get back to his kingdom are very generic, with simple trees, rocks, sand and water. This shows the simplicity of the game. Inside Bowser's body, as it isn't very realistic, you can walk on bones, and water, etc. It means that the game is suitable for it. The environment inside Bowser is rather bright and colourful, perhaps just to try giving the inside of his body a realistic look, red for blood, etc. But so might try to represent the character Bowser. As he's meant to be evil, it may represent the goodness inside of him, as inside his body is rather light. This can grasp the player to the game. In the forest it gets darker the closer you get to Bowser's castle. This shows that the atmosphere changes the closer you get to the final destination. It shows a physical representation of the atmosphere given off by the terrain and the environment, and the character that the player controls, and all the characters that the player interacts with. Minecraft's terrain is very simple. It's made of blocks, and in one of the main things that people remember about Minecraft, it's why it's so popular. The game's target audience is people of all ages. This is shown by the world, as the majority of it is bright and colourful, mainly focusing on primary colours. The only parts of the game that aren't bright and colourful are root forests, which is where a lot of mobs, enemy to the player, spawn. The colour is a representation of this, as the player is in constant danger while in the area. The other place that the map is very dark is in the Nether. This is the Minecraft version of Hell. A lot of dangerous mobs spawn here. The colour clearly represents a lot of different atmospheres throughout the map, depending on what biome, part of the map, the player is at. As Minecraft is rather an old game, with the beta first being released in 2005, this means that the bitmap graphics in the game can't match up to the vector graphics of the more modern games, but people still play it as the possibilities within the game are almost endless. The characters and non-playable characters are very important within a game. The characters themselves are important, as that is who you are playing as, so the player should become attached to them. And the non-playable characters, or NPCs, are important as the main character interacts with them, so they should have all the different personalities. In James Bond Bloodstone, the only character you play as is James Bond himself. This is because you can identify with him, as a lot of people recognise him from the films. This means that a lot of people will care about him more than a character you've just met, as some people will have grown up watching James Bond, so they'll have that emotional connection with him. The physical appearance of James Bond in the game is the classic James Bond look, with stylish tuxedos and a rugged face, classic James Bond. He isn't customizable at all. The only customizable thing within the game is you being able to decide what weapon you use at what point to kill a particular enemy. The attitude of the character is again classic James Bond. By using the shoot-to-kill style, no one can stand in your way from completing the mission, even if you do die a couple of times trying to achieve it. Daniel Craig himself voices the voice of James Bond, which makes the player think you're actually controlling the real James Bond. He only talks to the NPCs, but also has small monologues where the character develops throughout the game. Nicole Hunter. Nicole is the classic Bond girl in the game, making Bond all loved up and then stabbed him in the back while the player isn't expecting it. With long brown hair and the shortest of short dresses, Nicole is the stereotypical Bond sidekick. She grasps the player in, especially the male players, as with her purposeful good looks, she's surprisingly feisty, as you find out at the end as she stabs James Bond with a dagger encrusted with diamonds. However, with the expected kidnapping, the game is arguably sexist towards the women, as it makes her seem weak. But then again, what Bond girl isn't? She speaks only to Bond and M, as you don't actually play as her. You don't actually get as much of a connection with the character as you do with James. You do get to like Nicole, as she has a bubbly side, while also being the normal flirty sidekick you would expect James Bond to attract, but at the end the player is surprised by her lack of honesty towards Bond. In GTA 5, Trevor is one of the three main characters that the player controls in the single-player section of the game. Trevor's appearance is quite shocking to the player, with a cut hair tattoo around his neck and the stereotypical hillbilly dirty vest and ripped jeans. However, Trevor isn't at all generic. You wouldn't expect him to look like that, as most murderers and psychopaths are rather careful with getting caught, but Trevor just doesn't care. His looks represent his personality, doesn't care what other people think, and if it gets the job done, then everything's good. He's the character that most people remember the most, with his spray and pray, violent attitude to everything, and a barbaric approach to welcoming people into his life, whether that is his apparent friends or just prostitutes, which he then normally murders. He very rarely talks to the player and normally just talks to the other players throughout the game, which lets the player know more about the character through his dialogue, attitude and personality. He's very customizable, every part of him is customizable, from his weapons to his clothes to his tattoos and hair, everything. The player can make an emotional connection with Trevor, because as the game goes on we find out about what Trevor's been through and how he has been deceived. This could be a disadvantage though, as some players may find the story too confusing, as the story mode itself is very long, and has a lot of information that the player needs to remember all the way through to understand some points towards the end of the game. Lester is a tech-savvy NPC of the game, who can get the character that the player is controlling out of most situations, without the police catching them, or any of them dying. Lester is in a wheelchair, and is dressed like a bit of a generic dork, with old-fashioned jeans, his shirt tucked in and glasses. Players don't really connect with Lester, as you rarely see him out of cutscenes, or talk to him on the phone. He is however a very important character in the game, as he helps with the heists, which the player needs to complete to get money. He isn't customizable, as he is only seen in cutscenes, and sometimes you don't even see him when you talk to him, as a lot of the time you talk to him on the phone. This makes Lester easier to connect with because he is as he is and never changes. This responds with his personality, as he would never get into a situation that will put him in danger, especially because of his disability, and abides by the same rules throughout the game that is rather predictable. In Need for Speed The Run, Jackson Jack Rock is an arrogant, cocky and fearless street racer and a mechanic who owns a garage in San Francisco. He managed his garage with loans from a powerful Chicago family, and he squandered them out of the deal and refused to pay them back, owing them over $1 million. He was almost executed, but he saved himself and entered the run to provide enough money to pay his debts. He has a very generic appearance, which is good as he spends the majority of his game inside a car, so you can't see him anyway, so they don't need to spend a lot of effort on his appearance. But also because it would be easy for the player to imagine themselves being him, which is then easier for the player to connect mentally with the game if they think it's them driving the supercars that you drive in the game. He is the only protagonist in a story-driven Need for Speed game which talks. However, he doesn't talk to the player, he just talks to other NPCs in the game. This can be a disadvantage, as the character might not develop as much if the player doesn't fully understand who he is and the dialogue with other characters. However, it could be a good thing, as it signifies that Jack is rather alone and isn't used to having anyone with him, as he's used to not only working alone, but also being alone in everyday life. Sam Harper is one of the main characters in Need for Speed The Run. She helps Jack throughout the storyline and guides him on his way to victory in the run. She doesn't drive any vehicle, as she is Jack's associate. She doesn't have a massive role in the game and is quite a background character, as she is the one who gives you directions and organises places for you to get cars. The main advantage for this is that the player can fully concentrate on the race and the opponents instead of Sam. The disadvantage of you only hearing her voice the majority of the time is that it's more difficult to form a connection with that particular player. The feedback interface is how the game interacts with the player and what the player sees on screen. A feedback interface can be rather cluttered if the screen is full of different things. This can be distracting. The feedback interface can also be very minimalistic. We normally see this if the player needs to concentrate on one particular aspect. The Lego Movie game interface is very simple, with the character picture at the top left, as you can control different characters, so it's for the player to see who they're controlling. The simple health bar to the right of that, and the shared coin bank to the centre. The arrow, leading people to the mission objective, is made of Lego to carry on the scheme of the game. As the target audience for the game is children, 5 to 12 years old, the game's interface is more simple and not very cluttered, as it is easy for a young child to concentrate on one thing at once, but if they need to concentrate on multiple objectives, then it could be confusing for them. As LEGO Games has a basic interface for every game, they don't need to create anything new. If I were making the interface, I would insert a map into the interface, as it is very big and you can't always find where you're meant to be. The different interface is very different. This is even simpler and very visual, as you can see what you're doing as you're doing it. The pictures are very large to attract the attention of younger children. Journey has near to no interface. The game focuses on the artwork, so the screen is blank, so the game fully focuses on the art and the player is fully immersed on the environment and the terrain. The fact that there isn't much of a feedback makes the player feel rather confused, as they don't know what to do, and makes the player feel rather isolated, as they are alone with no direction or instruction. However, this can be a good thing, as it makes the player feel like the game is real, as if you actually get lost in a desert in real life, then you wouldn't have a health bar or anything, it'd just be you. It also shows how alone you are, as the character is completely alone in the vast landscape of the desert. The only feedback that the player receives from the game is that when you push the joystick forward on the controller, the character moves. The character doesn't talk either, so it's easy for the player to imagine themselves being the character. FIFA 15 has the same interface as every other FIFA game. The interface is set up so the camera angle is the same as an actual football game on the TV, so the player thinks they are playing in an actual football game. In the bottom of the screen, in the centre, is a map of the pitch, and the player that you control in bright orange, and the football in green, with all the other players as white dots. To the left of that is the player you are controlling and the power bar, so you have a rough idea about where the ball is going. To the right of the map is the opposition player that is chasing you. In the top left of the screen are the time and the team goals. It is at the top left of the screen because that is where it will be in a real football match on the TV. So it again gives the player the sense that they are controlling real players in a real football match. The screen isn't cluttered, so as the icons are rather small. This is so that the player can concentrate fully on the players and on the game. The perspective in the game is the camera angles and how the player views all the characters within the game. Sometimes the viewing angle can change within a game depending on actions the player is performing, but with the majority of games the angle stays the same all the way through. First person. Call of Duty has always been a first person shooter, so it has now come to a point that if they changed it, then the fans might not buy it. 3D first person allows the player to not only explore the map as a whole, with no apparent direction, but to also let themselves get more immersed in the game, by allowing themselves to believe that it is them in the battlefield actually killing people, as you don't see the face of the character that you're controlling. Third person. The game we are looking at is Uncharted 3 Drake's Deception. Drake is the main protagonist throughout the entire series. This is why the game is third person, so that the player can constantly see him. As all the games have been third person, it would be a mistake to change it, as all of the fans have got accustomed to the camera styles and directions that Naughty Dog used for the Uncharted saga. It being third person also allows the player to form more of a connection with Drake, as the player can actually see him killing people and performing actions, so this allows us to empathise with him. Side-scroller. The side-scroller that we're going to look at is Doctor Who The Eternity Clock. Side-scrollers are an old-fashioned way of viewing video games, starting with the original Mario game. The game was made rather quickly, within a few weeks, and as the BBC aren't known for making video games, it is likely that they haven't done enough research into what people who play video games want. Also, it means the player can't see the characters very well, as you can only see them from the side. However, it can signify what the game is about, as a lot of the game is set in the past, and the camera angle is old-fashioned, so the BBC might have done this to keep the old feel to the game. Top-down view. Grand Theft Auto London 1969 was released in 1999. As the game is very old, it cannot be compared to modern games. Top-down view is a very old style viewpoint to use in video games, and is used in games such as Pac-Man. It is used in classic arcade games. As it is the only GTA that has a top-down view, this shows that it wasn't very popular, and the players preferred the third-person view, thus a house style being made for GTA. As the game is old, technology in 1999 was very limited, so Rockstar had a small choice when it came to camera angles anyway. The good thing, however, is that the player can see in front of them, behind, and both sides of the character, so they are easy to control, and the character has a good view for driving vehicles, as a 360 view can be seen of the road and pavements. Context sensitive. Destiny is context sensitive. When the player is in battle, the view is first person, but when the player is in the Sentinel and buying weapons or armor, etc., the view is third person. They have done this because in battle, if you can only see the gun, it gives the sense that it is you in the middle of the battle. This gives the game a more real look and allows the player to become more immersed in the game. When the player is buying new armor and weapons, it is in third person because it allows the player to view their character fully and to view what new additions they have made to it before they go into battle. This is quite a new thing to do, changing camera angles, as technology now allows us to view a full 360 3D environment with a high quality look at different angles within video games. Full motion video is the notion of filming actual people and then putting it into the game. This means that the actions on screen are already pre-recorded, so the options that the player can perform are very limited. Examples of full motion video are Dragon's Lair and Just Dance. In Just Dance 2014, the player moves, but the characters on screen, as a person is recorded, stays the same for each individual song and doesn't change, even if what the player is doing is wrong, and then a CGI background is added. They have included full motion video into this, so the player has a character to mirror, and the game is more visually attractive to people. The advantage of using this is that the person on screen moves very fluidly and without lag, as it is a video of an actual person dancing. The disadvantages of FMV are that the player's actions are limited, as the video is only one recording, so there's only one option that the player can perform. This means that the player might not want to replay the game after memorizing the moves for a song. Also, the player doesn't get an attachment with the game, as the game doesn't give the player much feedback for dancing, it just shows the same thing over and over again for each song.